jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show.
Join us as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
Listener discretion is advised. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show.
Jericho, a small town in Kansas that witnessed a series of nuclear attacks that destroyed 23 American cities in a single day. And left our town cut off from the world.
Ours or theirs?
They're headed up. Must be ours.
Nearest missile silos in Wyoming, hundreds of miles away.
So this is it? We're at war?
How are we all today? I got filmmaker David Rutsala here today. How are you, sir?
Hello, how you doing, Cam?
I cannot complain.
Good. And we're here to talk about Jericho.
Yes. Doing
Jericho.
a post-apocalyptic week. We'll be talking less shit later on. And I'm just like, let's just get into the OG of that kind of just started up this whole subgenre again.
Yeah, I was thinking about like this specific subgenre where it's nuclear war and on the family front. And that really goes back a ways. You have like Arch Oboler's movie 5. Do you know that movie?
Say again, which one?
Arch movies and shows about focusing on the domestic reaction.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, rather than because you have lots of post-apocalyptic stuff that's either Mad Max, that side, or presidents and so on. Things like World War III, the miniseries from I think the early 80s. But actually you have some antecedents in this genre dating back to a movie called 5 that Arch Oboler did in the 50s, and you have 1962's Panic in Year Zero, which is Ray Milland directed and starred with Frankie Avalon.
Oh wow!
And then you've got The Day After.
The Day After is a very good contrast.
Yeah.
So that was a big TV event.
And you have in England, you've got Threads and what's the other one?
Testament.
Anyway, so you have yes, exactly, Testament. So you have like there's a bedrock of material when the show hit to like draw upon and to communicate with and counterpoint what they wanted to do. And I think like that the thing that really struck me initially in the pilot was they had that promo image of the kid on the roof seeing the blast, right? And you just think, and that's just a great iconic image, and you just think that's some promo image, right? And then when it's in the show, then this show knows what it's doing. Like it knows its own power.
Totally. And the co-creator, Jonathan Steinberg, he's done some big stuff like Human Target, and he's now currently writing for the show C on Apple TV, another apocalyptic show where everyone's blind in the future. But I'm with you. Like this was basically marketed towards the Lost and 24 crowd, maybe even Battlestar Galactica for lack of a better comparison. But yeah, it was totally in the vein of just all those other 60s to 80s, miniseries programs. I mean, and as we look through all these other shows, I mean, there was even a cool show on Showtime by the Babylon 5 creator called Jeremiah. Same kind of deal. Just
I remember that show.
Everyone just at each other's throats, what would happen more plausibly. And I was just always obsessed, like you were in general, just like it's when someone can do a post-apocalyptic trend and not be a cheap Star Wars or Mad Max knockoff and really do some serious homework on how do you think it would turn out. It's just great. It's really fascinating.
And we're talking about one of the early shows to sort of jump on the Lost bandwagon and also be, a serialized show, because that, every show nowadays, every show is serialized virtually. It
has to be. And just get people in. Yeah.
And back then, it still wasn't. I mean, even Lost, they were not comfortable when they originally pitched Lost with the notion of it being serialized, and so they actually lied and said it was going to be like self-contained episodes to get the green light.
It's really is that's where the industry definitely gets cutthroat, when everyone has to basically say, this is how we're doing it. No, that's not how we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, Strange New Worlds is going to make the attempt to go back to the one and done style, and we'll see how people react to that.
For Star Trek, yeah.
For Star Trek, yeah. Which, of course, has a tradition of that, but their new shows have, obviously have gone the other way. And it'll be interesting to see if Star Trek can kind of pull the industry back to the one and done style.
Perhaps. I mean, I just like how there's just something for everyone now. There's an R-rated cartoon, there's a G-rated cartoon, there's next gen continuation, then there's an experimental one. So it's like there's something for everyone. But yeah, I think they're definitely going to go back to the one at a time standalone mystery type with Strange New Worlds. And I think that's a good contrast here. I mean, I did see how I only knew about the show for the longest time because of how it was just another one that everyone was like, oh, the execs want to cancel it, but it's so good. It's too good to be canceled. And how many people were marching around using logos fan created before Redbubble was a thing. And they compared it to, the original Star Trek when it got kicked off NBC and later became a syndicated thing. And I was like, that's an interesting contrast. And it's like, that's kind of what it is. It's something that the audience gets it, but the critics kind of get it, but the networks, of course, just don't get it.
Thing back. And more recently we had that with Manifest, right? Very similar style show that had a rabid fan base, and was able to convince but they were able to convince Netflix to pick it up, and that's a big deal.
I didn't know they picked it up for that. I thought they were just translating it. But see, that's just how fast this all goes nowadays. Nowadays, we're just so caught up trying to catch up with everything. It's like everyone's buying the other one and deciding who gets seen where instead of. And it's it feels that way as a viewer. Like on the other side of the fence, it feels like they don't want anything. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's frustrating.
It's frustrating, because it seems like so much stuff. I heard from one of the streaming services recently. They're sick of fantasy, and
really,
they're just acquiring fantasy right and left. And I'm like you're not sick of fantasy. I don't know why I'm saying that.
You might not like the audience or what it brings, but I guarantee you love those ratings in that.
Yeah. And we just had Wheel of Time, blow out the numbers for.
It was insane. I couldn't believe how easy it was for me to get into that. I thought it was going to be pretentious and over the top, and it's just very vast, very huge, expensive piece.
Yeah, and they had that story. The storytelling was so clean and clear, and that they must have had tons of meetings to try and figure out how to make something that big into something that everyone could get on board with. And I really just felt in that first episode when they had the Trollocs attack, I was about ready to go, I don't know if I'm going to stick with this first episode. And then that happens, and that was just amazingly done.
An unusual way it grabs you.
Totally different. First, we've seen lots of action, but a fresh approach, and then like riveting, from a character standpoint. And and every episode seemed to have something like that.
And you just get to the point where it's like, if you just, it's weird. Some shows we want to get into them if they're similar to another show we binge and love, and then there's other ones where it's just like, if you're trying too hard to be like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciated that it wasn't trying to be Game of Thrones. Like it was like Game of Thrones is Game of Thrones. Like It did its thing. We're doing our thing.
They even changed up the books, so it's like it made it more progressive to the female cast, and
Yes.
And I mean, I gotta tip my hat to this show here in that, Jericho still has a pretty loyal Netflix following. I still see the DVDs get discounted at various dollar stores, and it's all.
Well, I mean, let's just start off with that cast, which is amazing.
Yeah, a bunch of semi-knowns, unknowns, and it's just.
I mean, you take Gerald McRaney, one of the most reliable television actors.
Totally, Simon and Deadwood, and he's here on this now as the dad, who's the sheriff, and
right, and then went on to do House of Games.
I think it was Cards. Yeah,
House of Cards. I forget which it is.
Yeah.
And I think this show really punched up his acting. Because he had such a hit with Major Dad that he kind of got boxed for a while into that broad comedy
good old
category.
Boy. How you doing, sonny boy? Yeah.
And he's such a solid actor. And then you have Skeet Ulrich, who was right in that perfect early 30s, right in that perfect mode to play his son, and a really talented actor who's now on Riverdale,
right?
As Jughead's dad.
Mm-hmm.
So now graduated to the dad roles.
He went from as good as it gets and screamed to this.
Yeah. But here he's still the young stud character and very good at that role, and I love in the pilot how he's they introduce him and everyone asks where he has been, and he tells everyone something different. So that's more really good writing, because two things. This guy's a bit of a mystery. You also know he's not entirely reliable.
Totally. Instead of doing the whole, he's an ex-con, he gets down to, he's coming back to a place he gave up, years ago, and he's re-evaluating it, and it's just. And then
he's got this instant love triangle, and with an actor like that, it's totally believable, that's going to happen.
1,000%.
And then you have Pamela Reed, another really solid actress from.
That was good casting there.
From tons of great television and movies. And
she's on Parks and Rec and Kindergarten Cop and just
Kindergarten Cop. That's one of her, we all loved her in Kindergarten Cop.
Bob Roberts, she's awesome. But yeah, I'd never seen her in this kind of authority figure role before as the concerned mom. And
then we have one of the best cast members, which is this town of Jericho, which is of course an entirely fictional town, mostly shot in California, and occasionally you get that. I was watching an episode the other day, and it was shot from the farm, and you see all the hills, California hills, and you're like, man, it's Kansas is flat.
Totally.
But still, it's it's that Hollywood thing where we're sort of conditioned to accept California topography as anywhere in the world.
They apparently filmed it at the Santa Anita racetrack in one episode, but it is interesting how it's they filmed in some of Wyoming, and then even when it ends up being in the middle of Texas, I even kind of accepted that, even though I didn't know for sure if it actually was filmed at there. So and it's interesting how it's not just a disaster show, an apocalyptic show, it's also a spy show half the time. This is
because you've got and that story, I mean, that's almost like its own show.
Something for the Tom Clancy crowd, and Lenny James is just so good at those mysterious roles. And I mean, obviously, here's another powerhouse, Snatch and Line of Duty, and plenty of other shows. But here he's hiding his accent for the most part, and has spread great in from 6 Feet Under's here, and Alicia Coppola.
And then we have Kenneth Mitchell, who has had his challenges in recent years. He's what does he have? He's he has ALS, and he was recently on Discovery.
Yes,
and they made they created a Star Trek Discovery. Yeah, they created a character who he could play with his limitations.
Totally. He and Brad Beyer is like, they've been around for a while, but they mostly just were the go-to guest stars, and it's a shame because you see both him and Beyer in the show, and you're like, they should be getting way bigger roles. They can really bring it. And fun fact, I even saw them both in this like NCIS 2-parter. And I was like, hey, it's a mini Jericho reunion. But it's just wild because, like you say, it's like the casting was just very atypical, and you had some reliable ones to start off the show, and then you just had some other just minor parts. It's like, that's some inspired casting. Like, even this other guy, Richard Spleak Jr., he's one of the deputies who is moral ambiguity. And you look at him, and he's been in all kinds of cult horror movies and Westerns and even Band of Brothers. And I'm like, but I've seen him, but I didn't all this time never recognize him. He's just another chameleon. And that's exactly what these guys need and Ashley Scott, same thing. I just saw her in bit parts like SWAT and Birds of Prey and Walking Tall. And is the other thing is like all these guys is like, regardless of what questionable material they've done on the resume, they know how to approach it. You never heard anything about them being rude at a convention or being late to set. Just gunning for it and just giving it their all. And I think it also just, like you say, I mean, Isai Morales, there's another guy, NYPD Blue, Caprica, and Criminal Minds, and here he is, again, playing a colonel who also has to question his ethics. He's like, okay, I've been ordered to do this. Got to keep the town basically on a deadlocked, but also at the same time, no one is who they seem anymore. You got two mayors running here, and you got, again, all these other questionable military authorities who I don't even trust my own database of what I'm getting. So I like how he just kind of waits out the tide. He plays chicken, with all these guys.
And it's a really good, simplified introduction to politics too, for people who don't don't fully understand the dynamics
talk about it. Oh, yeah. It is good in that. Yeah. It challenges it in a more, I don't know if it's progressive per se, but it is more of a just kind of open. It's like, okay, so what do we do? They do it in a more.
But one of the things you can when you're watching it now, years after, you can translate current political conflicts onto these two characters and sort of see how Gray is taking advantage of a situation to raise his political standing with the community, and then. I think it's one of the reasons why some of those cliffhangers hit so hard is because you kind of are off in some family story, a political story, a spy story, and then some element of the nuclear war comes back in, and you're like, oh right, that's what the show is about.
Totally. It doesn't about face constantly it invites you to be in the whirlwind instead of constantly surprised but feeling like something's missing or not well built up. And once again, on your earlier point, I mean, it's just that gives you an idea. Group. The mercenary group, and again, just the mayors doing their influence,
which is called Ravenwood, which is clearly a play on Blackwater, which of course was the big
still is kind of the big bad.
The big bad was, but at that time that you had that going, they were top of the news for what was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Oh, and good casting on Titus Welliver and even Lassie.
We also get, you know, one of the first times I saw Clayne Crawford.
That's true. Yeah,
You know, he plays a baddie. He plays one of the local baddies, and you know, he of course went on to do the Mel Gibson part in the Lethal Weapon television show,
and got too method acting there for everyone. But yeah, it's so true. And I mean, Timothy Olmanson, this is around the same time he had wrapped filming as like Lassie on Psych. But yeah, it's like all these various faces, you do end up remembering them instead of, hey, that guy looks evil, or that guy has a double agenda. And then when you introduce like the double subplot,
yes,
of hey, Emily's estranged father, you know, is James Remar, and he's the biker gang who is attacking both the Mercs and the sheriff's deputies, and just wants to be left the fuck alone. And I found that even more plausible. It's like, okay, there's going to be different parties. There's not going to be just one or the other. There's got to be some other factors. Eric Knudsen, who's now grown up.
Yeah, and that's something that every like show of this type has really imitated. You know, that notion of like, you have like, it's not just two sides.
No.
There's this other little group, and then there's this other little group, and you know, later on when they get into the, you know, that market town where there's all this stuff going on, you know, and they barely even want to know about it.
It's not the super friends will save the day right into town. And,
James Remar, there's another guy who's been around forever, sort of like he basically like since like Warriors,
Walter Hill crowd.
Yeah, he's basically been playing that same part, you know,
same part,
like
same mood.
doing his push-ups, keeping his hairline in order.
Mm-hmm. and there's a bunch of Canadian actors here too. Eric Knudsen, you know, plays Alec. And Continuum, here he is as Dale, and I love how the young boy.
Yeah, I mean, the Dale character. Sorry, go ahead.
He attacks the town bully, and you don't expect that, and you're like, but. And I was watching it with people, and they're like, he should answer for that. I'm like, but what's the point? No one else is willing to get rid of all these awful people. So
right.
It does make you even reconsider your morals after a while. It's like, am I okay with everyone shooting other people? I'm just like, no, not necessarily. But at the same time, I mean, these guys aren't going to go away any other way.
Well, I mean, isn't that like one of the keys to the show is like, it's by pulling the over society out of this small town, you get to see like what are the laws that you really want to stick, you know, which, you know, what rules are really important.
Totally. What can be compromised without upsetting everyone and seeming like contrarians versus what rules are going to end up, unfortunately, getting broken anyway, just because basically there's no one to reinforce them anymore.
Right.
And that's just it. It's like they do a good job of the radio silence and then the frets of how they think there might be some radiation in the water. And I'm just like, yeah, that's all some very key stuff to consider. And how everyone.
And I think one of the things the show really gets out about and why it made sense, because originally they were thinking of doing this as a movie, but why it makes much more sense as a television show is the way they spread out these events over time, you know, and as those of us, you know, now we've got, you know, in the last few years, we've gone through some big, like earth-shaking post-apocalyptic kind of things. And we see that they don't all get, another show might've wanted to do that right away, you know, like the counterattack, but they waited.
They did good at just, again, even making this be, you know, a mixture of kind of redneck stereotypes and actual like local militias they have to orchestrate. And like you say, I mean, it's good. It does a good job of mirroring more recent stuff.
I lost you for a bit. It's okay.
We keep losing each other. I don't know.
I don't know. Like I'm getting like, I have like a really strong connection here. So I don't know.
It's mine. And it keeps dropping for whatever reason.
It may be because is it because you're recording maybe?
I mean,
I don't know. It's the internet. It's amazing that we can do this anyway. Like we shouldn't complain, right?
But it is annoying how it's just
Yeah, it is
back
annoying.
back and forth. So, but yeah, no, the tower attack is really good, like you say, in that you get a lot of redneck kind of stereotypes, but you also mix it in with a lot of local militias that they got to orchestrate. It's like that it's already bad enough that the mayor isn't on their side, and everyone else is just intimidated by all the bikers and various other violent communities. And
Yes.
like you say, it needed that in order to read, again, both be a thinking piece that mirrored today's society stuff. And even when watching it during COVID, I didn't have any issues after the fact. I was part of the Netflix generation, but it was just because I just didn't know when it was on, and I had so much stuff to do during high school. But I was going to get to it one way or the other because it was just always one of the top ranked, canceled before, its time shows. And I see people even complaining about season 1 versus season 2, and I don't have any deal with
the
either
big
one.
thing. The big thing that jumps out in season 2 is they go to digital. And,
yeah, that's all I can think of, because that's
and especially at that time they didn't have the digital fully. It wasn't quite up to speed, though. Watching the first season, when I first watched it and watching it again, they're definitely using digital for some of the handheld shots.
Especially in the nighttime stuff, same kind of lighting I would see in a Star Trek Enterprise episode when, like you say, everyone's using it, but not everyone has a hand on it.
Yeah.
And, it had so much to go up against, as well as like it replaced the sitcom. It was on the same night as Bones. Well, guess what? I'm going to probably watch Bones because it's a pretty funny show. So,
right.
And then there's all these other stupid reality shows and gaming programs. So it's just like, did Les Moonves and all the other Paramount programmers just not want it on?
Right. Also, it's before streaming takes off, so the catch up is more of an issue. Whereas nowadays, it's so easy to catch up with shows. Because it's going to be streaming somewhere, right?
Totally.
And back then, you had to either like watch it when it was on, or wait for the DVD, or get it, through a illicit means, right, in order to catch up if you fell behind.
Totally.
And people just weren't quite used to that whole process anyway of just staying up to date on a show, because they did surveys back in the heyday of television in the 70s and 80s, and they found that even people who think of themselves as huge fans of a television show only watched about half the episodes.
Yeah, they just didn't have time.
So you can't, and some of these kind of shows, you can't really do that.
No.
You see that little up till now preview, and you don't know what part of it is. You don't want to watch that next episode. You want to go back and find out, well, how did that happen?
And it still seems to be a struggle. There's just many people who I don't even really bother with sci-fi shows on NBC until they're a few seasons in, because I just know.
I have the disease from being a sci-fi fan as a little kid, and I just have to watch the network sci-fi shows. I have to support them.
Oh, I mean, I'll see some action and comedy shows, but there are other ones where it's just wait 5 episodes, then binge it. It's all digitally recorded for me. And don't get me wrong, I'm seeing others who do the whole, cutting the plug, and I'm going to...
No, it's very common for people, not to watch a show till it's in the second season. That's just a totally normal thing.
I think most
people don't want to commit to something till they know it's going to be around.
Yeah, they've been wrong so many times to where it's this is not cool. And I think it also helped that the executive producers on this, Carol Barbie, who was another actress turned producer on some big shows like Judging Amy, and what's the other one she did? Touch, and you got John Turteltaub, who had been from the Jerry Bruckheimer School, done a bunch of different, comedies and Bruckheimer stuff. So it's I mean, it seems like everyone was just coming from the right mindset of just use whatever's at your disposal and just have a lot of fun doing this and take it serious. And I don't think they've ever been as serious as they got with this one. It's a testament to them all.
I mean, the other thing interesting going back to the show is like there's no paranormal.
No.
And it's so funny because like we're kind of conditioned that these shows like have
aliens.
Something, time travel, a portal, you know. And it's not that it's not, I mean, it's still science fiction because we're talking about, you know, like speculative, you know, stuff, but it's not, there's no zombies, there's no ghosts, there's no goblins, there's no, you know, there's no alternate timeline, you know, there's no meeting someone from the past. Like, and it's kind of refreshing. Lack of the paranormal in the show means that we have to see the humans actually deal within the parameters of what like reality offers, you know. And there isn't going to be like suddenly someone jumping through from an alternate dimension and, you know, or Skeet Ulrich's character coming back from the past and giving him a, you know, none of that's going to happen. And it really suits this, you know, the reality of the show, the verisimilitude that like it made that decision. And that in retrospect, it reminds us how that you don't have to always have, you know, to make these kind of shows exciting. You don't always have to have, you know, these heavy science fiction or paranormal elements.
Totally. It tipped its hat to X-Files without going all batshit crazy with its own formula. And I mean, it's already,
it's still, yeah, I mean, it's still, as I said, it's still a speculative fiction. It's still in the science fiction terrain as being a post-apocalyptic.
Kind of a neo-Western sci-fi.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I mean, that's a whole another discussion, which is what it owes to the Western, which is tremendous, you know, and clearly
it owes a bunch to Universal. Just like what they were doing with The Office and Battlestar, they were doing a bunch. CBS was doing like a bunch of like web games and everything, getting people involved, and that's kind of what's even more frustrating. You wasted all this time and all this money interacting with fans, and you're still you just want to let it go. It's just like, that's some serious energy to spend.
But the unfortunate thing about this show is because of the sort of like nature of the show is like, it would be hard to go back and revisit it now, you know? I mean, I guess you could, you know, like Jericho 20 years later.
Maybe.
But, you know, you're talking about like pretty deep into that, you know, then you start, you know, having to create like quite a tremendous, I mean, it's an interesting notion, but like, that's one of the reasons, since I think like 2009 was sort of about the end of when there was serious discussion about doing this show again or doing a movie or.
Yeah. I still have yet to read the comic books that are basically seasons 3 and 4.
Yeah, I've read them. They're like, I'm
not
kind of
like
sure
Revolution, where they're just kind of extended episodes, but they're not really any closure.
Yeah, they're really, I mean, I just think they're like another way to enjoy the characters in the show, you know. But I don't think they're real. I don't think they're really, you know. I mean, it's just like they did that with X-Files too. They had a season 10 comic. But then when they came back, But then when they came back and did the show again, like they basically ignored everything that was in that season 10 comic. So
that's
annoying. And Buffy did the same thing. And I'm sure if they ever did a Buffy again, they would ignore. And that was even more because. Do
you think mainly just the advertising is more to blame than just the scheduling? Because I can't recall seeing any ads for the show.
If he ever did Buffy again, I doubt he'd follow what was in there.
Well,
so,
yeah, but I mean, yeah, just going back to Jericho.
I mean, they're all interesting. I mean, I think all these, you know, notions of trying to finish a story in another medium is fun. I just don't think that's, you know, film is a very specific medium, and I think if you put it up on its feet, it becomes a different thing, you know.
it wouldn't hold its own in that way. It's better as a show.
Yeah.
In many ways, I'm kind of satisfied with what I got. And it's not to the point where it's just like, oh, it was all for nothing. It's like, no, I can kind of fill in the dots. They just keep fighting the good fight or whatever that is, you know, and just.
Yeah, I mean, I even feel like the season in and of itself kind of gives you a taste. The first season alone kind of gives you a taste of all of the places it can go. So then in your fantasy mind, you can see like where the spy story, where the war story could go. And they kind of give you a flavor of everything, you know, because they do have, in the end of the first season, they do have that real like war level conflict. So you can see where, like, you know, that might have expanded, or, you know, or the spy story expanded, and you have all the relationships, which, you know, are fantastic. And you can think of how like Dale would develop from what he's set up as.
Essentially, our protagonist basically replaces his father's shoes as the sheriff.
Yeah.
Jake.
Yes.
Sheriff Jake. And like you say, is just there's just so much good that just outweighs any weakness.
Yeah, and I think now's the time to specifically say to people who have never like watched the show, like they really should. Like especially like now would be a great time to watch it. You know, as you might want to look into, like, you know, work through some notions of like dealing with World War III. Plus, it's, you know, it's set such a standard, and it's such a template for this type. I mean, because it's clear that although the show only lasted 1.5 seasons, it was watched by a lot of writers and directors.
I don't think Revolution would have happened. It
wouldn't have. I mean, I don't think, you know, I mean, I think I don't think I mean, none of the, you know, I mean, I think
that was your go-between.
A lot.
If you weren't watching Lost, and if you had given up on 24, you were watching this one. It definitely. Yeah. And Battlestar and this one seem to be like some of the few that just about every TV viewer who was pretty active seemed to just make time for. They just dug the style, they dug the grittiness, and the actors just really helped bring those characters to life. And I recognize them still whenever I see them guest star on like a crime show or something. Like, I know that actor, I know that actress.
Right.
The one spy gal who betrays Hawkins, you know, tries to steal his device and everything. I've seen her later on Criminal Minds and a bunch of other shows, and it's like it's kind of made her career. It's like, we need you as the double deceptive gal, the female.
Right.
And even Emily Rose, this is before she's on this similar show, Stephen King's Haven. Same kind of deal. Mysterious town with something not quite right.
Yeah, I knew the guys a little bit who wrote that show.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, they actually had a podcast for I think it was called Sam and Jim Go to Hollywood.
I will be
and
sure.
It was
to check
like
it
before they broke in, and they kind of lost interest in the podcast once they got work, which I thought was kind of unfortunate, because I thought like it would have been, they were very good at the podcasting thing, and I thought it would have been interesting for people who were interested in the career of writing for television to like hear what it's like day to day, week to week, because it's very different than what it's imagined from the fan side. I mean, one of the hard things for, I think, a lot of fans to understand is like, for people, as much as the television or movies is a passion for the people involved, it's also their job. And so a lot of the issues are like job normal, like you're not getting along with this person, so that's causing this problem. You know? And
creative differences.
But like even just the basic boring stuff, like this person keeps leaving his food in the break room, and
oh, for God's sakes. And see, that's where it gets very annoying too, is like, I can't think, there's some positions where it's like, okay, so the actor and director argued for one scene. That's nothing compared to all the time and delaying production, making everyone lose faith. Yeah.
and
like makeup people and wardrobe, I'm almost always have had a pretty bad experience with. And so that's when I hear a celebrity scandal, it's like, okay, if it goes beyond them, now I know something's wrong, as opposed to, oh, I argued about how my hair was done, for 20 minutes.
Mhm.
But it's tough to tell. And like you say, office politics exists everywhere, and that's no exception. So it gets to where it's like, okay, so they just were never going to get along anyway, and that's a shame because they're both very talented people and they can't get along.
Right. But I think it's hard for many fans to kind of get a grip on like, that, it isn't like every day like the greatest thing in the world to work on a television show. It's it's really long. It's really long hours. It's
everyone thinks
if you're on the production side, you're talking like 16-hour days.
If you complain, you're labeled as ungrateful when really it could be like I hear people who worked on NCIS, they were often complaining about the hours. It's like, that's fair. That's fine. It sucks, but that's what it is. And
right. And it works on both sides because if you're on the producing side, like you're dealing with a crew who's whining about turnaround time, but if you're on the crew, you need your turnaround time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I don't know. It's already bad enough that agents will kind of pressure actors to take certain roles, or they go in and everyone does the whole, well, I'm not sure what I was getting into. And it's like, well, that's very true. The scripts aren't necessarily the same as what you see on screen either. Well,
television shows is so little for what they get, which is checks every week.
Right. And the Writers Guild is like, you pay $50 to register your work. And then it's like, I love how all the stuff they're replaying now is like 30 years old. So those writers are definitely getting, and directors and actors are probably getting just 10 cents at the very most. They're not getting anything what it's worth now.
Well, they still have not negotiated properly for streaming. It's just, the numbers are just not there.
I would bet.
They had finally up because they never properly negotiated
and they don't want to figure it out. They want to just,
you have to deal with like, what is an impression work, and then like Netflix yells at you because it's like, it costs us money when we play,
it's bad.
It's a big thing.
And I mean, it's pretty much, they're pretty much now are having to be kind of like movie stars where they do this whole tour at conventions to make half of what they're owed back, basically. It's like, sure, I'll go and tell fans and respond to how much they love me on this, just this thing I did 20 years ago, which I didn't get any recognition for, or I did, but it was mostly ignored.
Yeah, and that's a whole I mean, that whole convention circuit,
I got much else to say other than that. I also found this a lot of fun to watch Michael Gaston, who plays the crooked mayor opponent. I'm just so used to seeing him in everything, like Madam Secretary.
Yeah, I mean, he's such a great actor, and he's
go-to.
He's always on point. Like he's always on point. Like when when he shows up to do the role, like he's
so susceptible. You never know if he's going to be a flawed person who's going to change, or if he's a prickly guy who has ethics to uphold, or a government tool. But yeah, I just about every time I'm seeing him play a colonel or chief of staff or lawyer or just some other guy who may have his heart in the right place or may be flawed or maybe like, I must uphold the Constitution. And here he is. It's like his whole character goes through different standards throughout the whole thing. And you never know if he's going to turn around.
Donnie Darko. What?
You never know if he's going to turn around or if he's going to actually just keep going downhill.
Yes.
And I was still surprised with how it turned out. I was like, okay, I thought he was going to become cannon fodder. I thought he was going to do this. I was like, no, there's even more to this.
Yeah, I did want to mention Beth Clark too before we.
Yeah, Beth Grant. Yeah, from
Beth Grant, sorry,
and Speed, and yeah, she was a delight. Yeah,
and Donnie Darko.
Donnie Darko is. Yeah.
I mean, she's the one who says, "I sometimes I doubt your commitment to Sparkle Motion."
Yes.
which is one of the, the best lines in Donnie Darko.
There you go.
But she has that wonderful relationship with Dale. There's that's an an unexpected alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And very emotionally, believable, but also unique, and and the way he looks out for her and she looks out for him, and then they have falling outs, and and she's kind of being a surrogate mom, but not entirely.
I just even remember her from just other stuff like No Country for Old Men, and what was the other one that was so awesome? I mean, hell, she was even in one of the Child's Play movies, but I remember in To Wong Fu and Little Miss Sunshine, and she she essentially owned it. Yeah. I mean, yeah, she had to get that small town kind of appeal, and just playing the head of that store, and it was just like, okay, so this is the main connection. This is like the main inner conflict of the town. Everyone else has their other conflicts with, getting back together, putting up with each other's shit, trying to figure out.
Yeah, and that's like one of the great things about how they devised the show is they really thought, like, what are the things people need, and then let's put characters in
and
that.
Don't over plot it to where you're just like, okay, this ended too fast, or this was the interesting tie-in, and all this other stuff not interesting at all. And that is like, you pretty much find it all equally interesting. They just must have really padded it out, and I pretty much was thinking like a writer just while watching it. I was like, okay, so I'm pretty sure they took a beat, and then they found out halfway through the meeting, okay, I saw the attention deflect. This doesn't work. We got to enhance this, to make this more interesting to film. And it's not easy, because sometimes it does work on paper, but it just didn't translate for whatever reason.
Yeah, and also, I mean, one of the things you'll notice with like the kind of actors they have in a show like this is they don't need as much as you think. They don't need as much dialogue. They don't need as big a moment. Sometimes they can do it with just half a look, and you're like, oh, I can just cut out half of. We can just stop shooting. Like they don't have to
cater to any ego. They're pretty much all down for the count. Yeah.
Yeah. And plus they just can, they just can do so much with, a look, the reading of a single line, and you have a whole speech, and you're like, they've got it. That one line says the whole thing, and that so often happens in productions where the actors just make you realize, like, every writer overwrites. That's just a issue with writing. But when you work with really good actors, you really feel it, because they can do so much with they can just walk into a room and they've already told you so much about their character.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a delight having you on.
Great.
And I hope you stay safe out there, unlike the participants on the show.
Yeah, this was great. I hope we can do it again, do some other shows that you're interested in.
Some other fun chat that stands out. Yeah, sure.
The plague is over. So is the famine. But peace doesn't keep itself.
This is USS Jeffrey Mishner.
All systems go.
This is USS All.
This is Nathan James Actual. We are proud to no longer be the only ship in the fleet.
It's a great day for the Navy and for...
Sorry, we lost our satellite feed.
What just happened?
Those aren't ours.
The U.S. was the victim of a cyber attack.
Your leader, he's a revolutionary.
It's funny when Latin Americans stand up for their rights.
Al norte!
They are revolutionaries.
You may have hit us hard, but we will fight.
Toy ships and paper maps. It's like we're back fighting World War II.
Come at us again. I dare you.
I win when Tom Chandler is chanting my name.
This is Nathan James out.
The Last Ship, an all-new season, returns next summer on TNT.
Alrighty, welcoming superfan to the Last Ship chat is Becky Jolene. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I cannot complain. So we're moving on to the post-apocalyptic war drama that chronicles the events aboard the USS Nathan James, a lone naval ship that must find a way to save humanity from extinction after a fatal virus decimates 80% of the world's population. Don't worry, this was before COVID. I don't know about you. I pretty much saw every season of this recorded off of TNT. I found it very similar to a similar submarine or naval ship show called Last Resort, where the world goes to hell in a handbasket. It was kind of similar to other blockbusters like Executive Decision, 24, Olympus Has Fallen, and Outbreak, obviously. But when figuring out what it was really about at the time, it was just kind of interesting. It's like, here's giant blockbuster filmmaker Michael Bay putting his name on this. TNT's making it be a annual summer event show, and it's based on a book that dates back to 1988.
I haven't personally read the book, but that is something I've actually want to do now. I actually love to get like the TV shows that are based like on books. I watch the TV show first, and then I figure, I weigh my options. Is, worth it to get the book, or should I just, So I'm like, when it came to the last ship, I decided, I'm like, let's check out the show first. I think the show premiered in 2014, I believe it was. So I was like 19 when the show started. At the time, I missed the entire first season.
Oh dear.
I missed the first season. I missed the entire first season. But then over like the course of like 3 months, I practically begged my dad. I said, Dad, I'm like, I need, we need like cable or like satellite. I said, there's this show on TV, it's called The Last Ship. I'm like, it's really intriguing. I kind of like, got into it. So my dad's like, all right. So he arranged it, like we got cable and everything. And by then, when they came back for the second season, I was so confused because I'm like, it showed like where they like Dr. Scott's death. I think it was. Oh no, Dr. Scott's death wasn't in until like season 3, I think.
Yeah, and that had some interesting star power leading into it. So Rona Mitra, there's an actress who's had bit parts in movies like Hollow Man and Shooter, and she had just been on the show Boston Legal as the very awesome lawyer who kind of looks the other way. But yeah, I mean, she was also like the model for the original Tomb Raider games, so it's like, yeah, she's kind of a big deal.
What actually got me into the show was Adam Baldwin, because I remember him being in Firefly, because I also grew up watching Firefly as a kid, and I'm thinking like his character on Firefly was awesome, and then seeing him like different movies that he did, it's just like I've been like a lifelong fan of his. And then when I discovered that Adam Baldwin was going to be in The Last Ship, and I'm like okay, I'm like, that's what drew me in.
And it was like his second big giant show. Because like, I don't know, saw him on Angel, Chuck, or even X-Files. He just was always kind of come in and be kind of the mysterious guy, either good or bad. And he just was always good at just kind of laying it out. And it's like, hey, you might think I'm this guy, but I'm really this guy.
Yeah. And on the subject of the show, this show also kind of hits like a thing for me because I got my dad into it, and we watched it from, start to end. And then last year, my dad passed away from stage 4 lung cancer. So he had it. He was diagnosed in December 2020 with cancer. He ended up, we got the call from the Oasis Cancer Center to confirm that he did have cancer, and he didn't have long to live. They didn't think he was going to make it past his birthday. My dad's birthday was April 15th. He made it to his 64th birthday. And the last memory that I do have of my dad was watching The Last Ship with him.
Man.
Him and my mom went into a nursing home. And I was May 31st of last year, I got the phone call while I was at work that my dad had passed, and I was devastated. I, lost the man that, was my best friend, my partner in crime, my Last Ship show watching buddy. So now that, it's over the last few months, it's been taking me a bit, to watch The Last Ship, because it was one thing that me and my dad watched, and, I miss him every day.
I hear you.
I try not to dwell on it, but,
it's hard.
But I know
especially
that
if they're the one who would start the viewing. And when it was that way with NCIS, where she'd be kind of just the one who's like, hey, let's watch a mixture of military action, office comedy, and naval related murders. It's like, okay, that's an odd mashup for a show, but I got into it, and next thing I know, she passes. I'm just like, well, I'm kind of reminded of her from this show, so I'll take a break. I'll step back from it for a bit, and then I'll catch up on it.
But that's how it is. And now I'm starting to get my mom into it, but my mom suffered a massive stroke in 2020. So she's completely paralyzed on her right side. So we she has the early onset of Alzheimer's. So she remembers some things, other things she doesn't. But getting back to the show, what I thought was very interesting, and I just had found this out. I was talking with my oldest sister, and because she watched the show as well. She's only seen it in like spurts because she works a lot. I told her, she's like, did you know that in the show, the ship number is 151, but she's like, in the book, it's 80. And I'm like, I always thought it was like, my first instinct was like, oh, I thought it was just like one number to begin with. So I went back, and looked, and I'm like, okay, there's two different numbers. And then my initial thought with the show was I actually wanted to serve in the Navy after I graduated high school.
Oh, really? Wow.
I wanted to, that's what I wanted to do. And unfortunately, my senior year had different plans for me. I ended up breaking my left foot in school. I fell in gym class. And the way I broke my foot has actually, the pinky bone of my left foot is what I broke. And I figured, there goes my chances,
Wow.
I come from a military background because my dad was in the U.S. Army for 13 years. He didn't serve in any wars though, but I actually have his service picture. It's right up above my head here. His picture's like right up above my head here. It's his service picture, and so anything that has to do with military wise, I kind of associate it with my dad, and that's how I felt about The Last Ship.
Gotcha.
I wanted to follow my dad's foot. I wanted to, like, I was like the tomboy. I wanted to follow my dad in his footsteps, and, you know, other things have come up.
Gotcha. And I think overall, like, this show is just interesting in that they kind of make it the viewers feel like it could be anyone, like, from the audience, because they just did a good casting of people who just have the everyday kind of person kind of look.
Mm-hmm.
It helps that, you know, this is still streaming on Hulu, so there's always new fans who can come by and get it who didn't have cable. And I mean,
yep. And then when I discovered that Eric Dane was going to be on this show, I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I remember him being on Grey's Anatomy. And then I don't remember who or where I found out that when he got the role in The Last Ship, I think that is why he ended up leaving Grey's Anatomy. Because I think he had gotten the role in The Last Ship or something like that. I don't know where someone had told me.
I think he had already
found out.
I think he had already left it long before. He was doing like some movie bit parts like Marley and Me, and then he had like some kind of, not a scandal, but I think like some private encounter that was the subject of tabloids, and he was just not comfortable with all that extra attention.
Oh, yeah.
But this was kind of the first time where I was just really hearing his voice on a regular basis, and it's like, okay, he's an interesting actor. I've seen him in X-Men 3 too, and it was like, okay, so he's been around for a while. And from this point on, like, this made me familiar with some of the other supporting cast, like Jocko Sims, Marissa Knightling, and Christina Elmore. And I was like, man, they've been in lots of TV shows, and Bridget Regan, who's been on a bunch of other material like John Wick, and
Faye Masterson, who plays Garnett. I didn't know this. I watched behind the scenes footage, I think it was. I found out that Faye Masterson was in a movie called Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, I've never seen the movie personally. I haven't seen that movie. And then I also found out that Faye Masterson was in 50 Shades of Grey as the maid. And I'm like, oh. I'm like, okay, this is a different change of pace.
Yeah. You've done a lot of video game voiceovers too for like Mass Effect and guest spots on
like I've seen like some of the cast, you know, they've done like voiceovers in video games. I like, in all honesty, if it would be nice, you know, to convince, you know, like the creators of the show, you know, Hank and all of them, and Steven, you know, even Michael Bay, you know, like convince them, you know, like, hey, you know, there's still a loyal following of fans, you know, like, why don't we, you know, like make like a video game, you know, like based on the show, you know, like take like some key points from like each season, you know, and compile them into a game. I honestly, that was like, that came into my head like after I finished season 5. I'm like, there were still so many unanswered questions I had about the show after it ended, and I'm like, what? I'm like, this happened, that happened. I'm like, I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it, you know, and figure out, you know, like what's going on. That's how dedicated I am.
I do a free kind of show after a while.
Honestly, like I just remember talking here. I have the show right now.
Oh, you're
you know, just to
right
like,
now.
you know,
Nice.
And then I'll be at work and I'll be like, yeah, I have the show on right now on my TV. And I actually have the first 3 seasons of the show on DVD. I have to get the last two. I have to get seasons 4 and 5 to complete my collection. And then I'm set. Because how I'm watching, I have it, I know it's on Hulu. My sister has a Hulu account, and she's allowed to have like up to like 5 like accounts on the thing. So I'm like, when I found out she had Hulu, I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm gonna sit and watch Last Ship. Oh yeah. I'm like, I'm happy.
Nonstop. All right. This introduced me to a bunch of other somewhat known character actors, like Jody Turner-Smith, who's been in movies and shows like Jet and Queen and Slim and Without Remorse. I'm sure you'll recognize Travis Van Winkle. He had been in a bunch of Michael Bay movies and shows and college comedies. Bryn Foster, he plays the Israeli guy.
He plays Wolf.
Yeah. It's like he had been kind of it's just so hard when I was like, he's Australian and he's been in all these other video games and sci-fi movies. I'm like, okay, wild. So I'm with you. It does kind of become that, okay, I'm going to check out their other works. That's very intriguing. And the guy playing Burke, who's like the brother of Carlton, I was just like, yeah, that's interesting. LaMonica Garrett's been in a bunch of comedies, and then he later went on to be on.
Oh yes.
I loved him as the Secret Service agent on Designated Survivor, and he's on the DC superhero shows and Sons of Anarchy and Yellowstone prequel. And I was like, he's interesting in that he kind of does little small subtle touches. One minute he's commanding, another minute he's just kind of smooth.
I had recently found out that Jodie Turner-Smith's husband is Joshua Jackson. And
I didn't know that.
I've been a lifelong fan of Joshua Jackson. I've only seen like a few of his movies and stuff, but when I've learned that he got married to Jodie Turner-Smith, I'm like, he got married to Azima from The Last Ship. I'm like, oh wow.
It's a small world.
I honestly, a lot of them, I remember John Piper Ferguson, who played Tex.
Oh yeah, he's been around forever.
My god, I know. It's like, oh my god, my personal favorite character that I got like really entitled to was Mike Slattery, because he reminded me of my dad in so many ways. Like, you know, he always like looked at, like, my dad was like a strong focal point, and I like coincided with that. Mike Slattery with that.
Which one was Mike Slattery?
Adam Baldwin.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
He was the XO.
Okay.
Later Admiral.
Okay. Yes, Baldwin's role. Sorry, just trying to keep everyone not confused. Just trying to give it up. But that he owned the role. I started recognizing Master Chief, who's basically like the third in command, Charles Parnell, because
Charles Parnell.
He'd been in just so many great indie films and guest spots, and
then Charles Parnell is actually in the upcoming sequel to Top Gun.
Yeah,
he's I was like, I recognized the name, and I'm like, oh, Master Chief's going to be in the Top Gun sequel. I'm like,
sense.
Oh wow.
He has just a very engaging voice, and there was this one like insurance ad I kept seeing him in post Last Ship, and I would keep guffawing. I'm like, hey, he's getting everywhere now. And if you want to see this really great indie film he kind of started in, it was like one of the first movies he ever made, check out Pariah. which is a very cool movie where he plays like a cop and a dad. This one gal who's like closeted and just trying to make her way in the world and get away from her very demanding mother. And he was just so excellent in that role because he just would add just little small touches to it. It's like, hey, I'm there for you. Even if, you know, mom is being just terrible to you, I'll always support you. And and you look at his various credits and you're like, he was in that movie, in that key role. Oh my God, I got to see it again. You know?
Yeah, there's like a lot of the characters, like in season, I believe it's season 4 when they're looking for the seeds. Captain Chandler ended up in like in Greece and stuff, and like the villain of season 4, Jackson Rathbone. I trying to remember the Jackson Rathbone's character's name. I have everything.
Let me back up for those who are still with us. So season 4 is set 16 months after they do a constitutional crisis where they try to remand the U.S., take down some of the remaining followers who are basically making America be in shambles and get it back to being some kind of version of the U.S. after an apocalyptic kind of fight. And yeah, season 4 was just wild because now they're introducing this bizarre virus that kills like crops and people. And yeah, Rathbone's character, he was like, I think the guy who sold the virus, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. I'd have to. Oh my God, I believe so.
And then like, Dr. Valak is the main bad guy, and he's played by Peter Weller of RoboCop fame. And that was just kind of wild because, one thing I noticed about Weller is if he's on a show, it's often a show that he's also directing, and he had directed like a ton of episodes, and they're like, hey, okay, we'll finally let you go in front of the camera now, and you'll be the main big bad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and speaking of Peter Weller, like, I know he was also on Sons of Anarchy, and he directed like a few episodes of that.
Yep.
And I'm like, I was like, oh my God, I'm like, this dude, if I grew up watching RoboCop, and then I figured, like, because I remember Peter Weller just like by like the sound of his voice, and then like years later, like I watched him in he was also on Star Trek Enterprise.
Yeah, he was a great villain on that, and 24, and then
that's when I got back in, like when I heard Peter Weller's voice on that, I'm like, oh my God, I recognize this dude.
Just on the voice alone. And he around the same time he was doing Sons and Last Ship, he was also like back and forth on Longmire. He'd show up as the former sheriff who would give the current title sheriff some advice, and then in between like direct like a few episodes. And he's like, man, he never stops working. And I had pals who had been extras on other shows he had worked on, like Salem and what have you, and he's like just the nicest guy. He'd do a lot of chain smoking in between takes, but he'd always congratulate everyone saying, hey, nice job, man, welcome back. This is like, that's cool to know. Because you always hate it when
and then another
you always hate
another
it okay. It looks like we got an internet delay. Okay. So
it's
just one
probably
last,
on my end.
No, it's all good. One last delay. It is interesting how it's like you follow all these cult icons, and you're just like, and you're just always disappointed when you hear bad stories about them. So it was just comforting to know. I was like, okay, cool. That's one part of my childhood that is not shattered.
Yeah. And another season 4 character that I recognized was Admiral Demetrius who's the head of the Hellenic Navy, played by Costas Mandylor of the Saw franchise. I honestly, when I seen him on the screen for the first time, and I'm like, it's the evil cop dude from Saw. I'm like, okay. I'm like, who are they gonna bring in next? Like, it was just.
He apparently is like an Australian guy, and he's like
speechless.
He's like the brother of Louis Mandylor, who was on Martial Law and My Big Fat Greek Wedding franchise, and it's like he kind of just was always in a lot of these B pictures, and then started in a bunch of other like TV guest spots like this in NCIS, and then post Saw he just started being kind of the go-to for just kind of a lot of B pictures, and this is like a very big key role, and you're like, and it does take you a moment to realize like, that is a character actor who has been around for a while. Here he is playing a guy who you thought was kind of the main big bad, but isn't pulling all the strings. He's actually being betrayed by the other bad guys. And when they get to that final season, that's where it kind of became just all a very different kind of show, where it's like now they've cured all the pandemics, but now they got a Colombian revolutionary who's played by Gustavo Maurice Comte, who you might know from shows like Breaking Bad, and it is like basically he wanted to conquer all of North and Latin America, but and I mean that's where season 4 and 5 got even more intriguing to me, because like then they're dealing with like China, they're dealing with a bunch of other revolutionaries. It's a whole different, they did a good job of just making it a different playing field each time, where it's like it's not about conquering countries, it's about basically standing your ground and basically a chess game nonstop.
Yeah. I like some of the characters like that I like that I one in particular, this is I believe like back in like season 2, the character Valerie Raymond, played by Tanya Ramon. I kind of like her expert work on computers was like, wow. Yeah. And the work that like the other acting work that Tanya has done, she was in Texas Chainsaw 3D. That was a good movie. I kind of like, you ever have a chance, watch that movie. There was a movie that Tanya had done based on the based with Jody Arias, who was convicted of killing her boyfriend Travis Alexander.
I think I saw that.
And
movie.
What I thought was very like coincidence was if you put a picture of the real Jody Arias and Tanya Ramon together, like, you know, like side by side, you can tell they almost look alike in the thing.
Oh yeah.
They kind of look alike. But I think the character that I felt most for was Christina Elmore's character, Granderson. Right. I loved her. She was like one of my favorites.
Yeah.
She was another one of my favorites.
Elmore's pretty summed it up well, because basically, she's like one of the high-ranking lieutenants. She would often be like co-commanding the bridge when the captain was away, and Master Chief needed another like commanding officer. But it was wild too how she has like a traitorous lover in that final season, and she's still getting over the fact that her mother was like next up to be president and just betrayed everyone's trust. And Tanya Ramon, like you say, was an interesting character because she's like someone who's like working with some pirates and talking over kind of bootleg like satellite and everything. And she's just an interesting actress because she just always catches your attention. And she had also been on like Lost and was later on Goliath. And it was just interesting too because like when they meet her, they get ambushed and you're just like, whoa, who trusts who? Did that come from some men that she employed, or was it another bunch of saboteurs who don't have any good ideas for how the future America is going to be? And even just the various actors who would play the presidents were interesting because they'd always have like a traitorous chief of staff who had other plans. There'd be other minor characters he would like too, and then when they got killed, you're like, no. And it's like, bring them back. And yeah, all the actors playing the presidents, like I've seen on other shows, and they're just always just they've been basically they're like at the 5th stage of their career, and they're just on this fun summer show. And it kind of just also was a shame that each time you would see the trailers for it, they would just show they would just make it look like it was very over the top when it was really pretty restrained and suspenseful, which was kind of a shame because it's like, yeah, it's like, if you can promote the show, can you at least show what it's really like instead of just showing the first few, shootouts and saying this summer, and you're like, it's not a brain dead show. It really isn't.
Exactly. That's how it is with like some other shows like recently that I've seen. I was like, like you have to understand, like what, like understand like the character arcs, like, and then the, like, what's gonna happen, just don't show like the the climatic clips, and then just be like coming soon, or coming in whatever year, like,
yeah,
oh, come on, like.
And they do it a lot, and a lot of the time it's because they used to produce everything in studio where it would be like, next week, here's a plot twist, and it was produced by the production companies, and now people just don't make time for it. So now they always hire like outside production companies where their job is to make a very compelling trailer, and unfortunately it just seems like half the time they just get bored going through all the footage, so they just go to the first few shocking moments and you're like, you gave it all away. Yeah. And the filmmakers are involved.
And another interesting thing, I didn't know that Marissa Netling, who plays Kara Green, I didn't know she had a twin sister. I never knew that.
Is that
that is actually something. That is actually something I just recently found out, that she has a twin.
That's wild. What is she also her photo double?
I don't know. That is like her. I just thought it was like, I don't know if it's her twin or if it's her younger sister. I don't know.
Interesting.
I swear.
She's been in a bunch of blockbusters.
Most Marissa Netling though in San Andreas was. I was like, wow, that movie was. I'm like, wow. My jaw dropped though when I seen Marissa Netling in San Andreas. I'm like, it's Kara. I'm like, it's her.
The movie became a whole different kind of disaster movie all of a sudden. She's the go-to for being in a disaster movie now. But yeah, she's been doing a lot of TV recently, but I think this was like one of the first few credits I could find her on. She was like doing theater at around that time, and it was just interesting how her character gets pregnant, but she never becomes a damsel in distress. She's always very strong, and it was just cool to see her she really does raise up for the ranks in a different way, where she's actually kind of doing some security kind of jobs for the Pentagon, and the actress as a whole just kind of keeps just surprising you. You never know what kind of role she's going to play. And I saw her on like some of the later seasons of Madam Secretary as a Russian ambassador kind of gal, and I was like, wow, okay, I didn't know she could do all these accents. Interesting. And but yeah, on this show, like, she just pretty much, I guess you could say, just dominated it. She just would always have, at first she has to raise her kid by herself because her other wingmen, known as her husband, is unfortunately still having to go out and fight on the ship. And then she just finds other ways to keep just like the president safe. And it just was interesting, just multiple kind of things they gave her to do that not just anyone could do.
Yeah. And speaking, going back to Mike Slattery, like, I always questioned myself, like, was he ever going to find his wife and his daughters? Because I remember that his son had passed, and my first instinct was, is he ever going to find his family? And I'm thinking, like, there's gonna be, like, if they end the show on where he doesn't find his family, like, that is going to bug me, like, like, what happened to his family? And then we finally, I believe we do meet his wife and one of his daughters, because if I'm not mistaken, his other daughter, Hannah, had passed, his other daughter.
That's kind of what I recall. Like, everyone in his family had been reported dead, and he was just, that gave him nothing to hold on to except, now I want vengeance.
Exactly. And like, going back, like, when they made it to like home base and stuff, and Slattery had went back to the house, to see like if his wife and his family were still there, and how he left the cure there on the table with a note, my heart was like, I'm like, my first instinct was, do you think that maybe they went back, to grab that? Or were they somewhere where they, that was like a pivotal point for me. I'm like, this man is like with his family, like, he is,
and then
searching for it,
I think that same season he gets like stabbed by like an assassin, and he has to heal, and at the same time, like, just they're at the same time they're trying to find out all those other guys that got the seeds and are planting it and everything. And it's just so wild how you just never know what you're going to get into. But like you say, I think he was kind of just in denial, but at the same time still holding out hope, because he it's not like he ever saw any bodies. So at the same time, he's like, they might be alive there somewhere. They might be still somewhere, and I just have not found them, because I just don't have anything else to hold on to other than, my brothers in arms who are part of the Navy.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's a good question for you. Out of like all the various characters on the show, which death hit you the hardest?
Ooh, probably Inbar Lobby. Inbar Lobby's other Israeli gal who comes on in like the second or third season. It was like, man, her death was just so unexpected and just very emotional. And that's when everyone was really suffering that season. Is like, they're passing out from just very chaotic wounds and everything. Even the captain, I think, goes down and is just pretty much immobile for half the season. And it was just one of those, like, man, it's like, so they were doing so well. They were sabotaging these other terrorists and everything, and going ship to ship, kicking a bunch of ass, being very stealthy, and yet is like just barely made it back home to America alive. And then when they make it back to America, is like they're ambushed by all these mercenaries who you think are also evil at first, but are basically an anarchy against the United States, which has basically become a fascist country. And so it's like, man, just you had all those plot twists back to back and all those casualties. And there was even this one Asian tech who I liked, who was played by Andy T. Tran. And I actually got a chance to talk to the actor one time casually, and he was working on a lot of indie film projects outside of that giant, TV show. So
the one character death that kind of hit me the hardest was Granderson, Christina Elmore's character. Like, she went through so much, like with her mom, and everything, and then being shot by someone that she loved, and that was a traitor. That really hit hard for me.
And very well played by Alfre Woodard, who many will know from Star Trek, First Contact, Luke Cage, and Cross Creek. Just the casting was just really very well done for all those White House guys. And like you say, it's like the last thing you want to do is have to kill the person who birthed you. And it's like, man, but she's doing all these things. She's killing everyone on the spot. The minute they find out they got the virus, they're expendable. And it's like, oh man, where did you develop such a,
and then how,
just that mentality to do these unthinkable things? And it just was it just was so wild how they're doing it that season. Here they are at home, and at the same time, they're still having to do with some Irish terrorists who also have a submarine. They weren't the most memorable villains, but that was a cool thing to have in the background while they're on U.S. soil and they're trying to, end this tyranny.
Yeah, when Granderson, like, she got shot by her girlfriend, that made me cry. Like, I cried. I went through an entire box of tissues because I could not stop crying after that. And I'm like, that girl has been through so much, and only to get killed by someone that she loved just because this chick wanted, I'm thinking like, come on. I'm like, nah. My heart sank though. I was devastated.
Totally. And that was the last season that happened, I think, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Season 5, I believe it was. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. But yeah, I think this overall show is just worthwhile for fans of apocalyptic ones. And when they had the one Asian gal played by Deacon Leichman, who was like helping them steal a lot of the copters and subs around like season 3 or 4, I thought that was cool because she had been on that similar show called Last Resort, which was also about kind of a submarine lost in the islands trying to prevent World War III. So I was like, man, what similar show she's on, and she's on this one too. How awesome. And yeah.
It's the show, like, for anybody that's listening, if you're honestly like just scrolling through, looking for something to watch on TV, like, or if, like, even if you have like streaming service like Hulu, if you're honestly looking for a very good show, I highly recommend The Last Ship. Trust me, your first instinct might be, oh, this show seems boring. You gotta watch the first episode, like, and then just sit there, and soak it in, like, is the show worth watching? It so is. The show is so totally worth watching. And I wish they could have kept going for more seasons, in my opinion.
It had enough juice to last it a while.
Yeah.
I think at that point, I guess, because they were just such long work weeks that they... But yeah.
I just love, and then like going on and watching like behind the scenes clips from the show. And some of these clips, I honestly, for anybody that's listening, if you want a good laugh out of The Last Ship, you've got to watch the behind the scenes clips, because they honestly, they will get you to laugh. Like, I love it. Like, some of the behind the scenes clips and everything, they're just so fun. Video that I believe Jocko Sims did, like, behind the montage by him with the cast. Love that video. Like, it just shows like behind the scenes work and like how much fun and hard work it would go into a show, like, with everybody. It seemed like that show would have been awesome to work. The Last Ship has totally changed my life, you know. And if anybody's listening, I highly recommend this show. You gotta watch it.
Altogether, just very fun blockbuster on the small screen, you know, spread out over 10, 13 episodes, and it's an easy binge too. It's really is dynamite the way it's assembled. So thank you ever so much for being on this show.
Thank you so much for having me.
For sure.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try...
They must be destroyed on sight!
The new Podcast Cure-All, sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of...
They must be destroyed on sight!
As needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pott's disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds? Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am, in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in it.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week, I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this movie.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history
up.
all popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped from watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was going to be a rough
How could you watch
one.
this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
Greetings, friends. My name is Dean Legero, and I'm the host of the 3324 podcast. I invite you to join me and my lifelong friend Eric Kuber to come with us as we discuss the music and movies that shaped our life. Each week, we'll pick an album or film that we really connect to, and not only give you some great info and trivia, but also discuss, debate, and celebrate what it means to us and the journey it took us on. We also look forward to hearing from you and giving us some of your picks for us to check out and discuss. I think it'll be a really fun experience, so come along with us for the ride. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider and at 3324.buzzsprout.com. Thanks for your time, and welcome to the 3324 family.
It's time, let's check our queue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. With a one-last plot holes or gratuitous movies. It's time to get busy with your friend Steve and Izzy. At eilfm.podbean.com.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up